right. History is a field that relies on the discoveries of the past to determine what will be considered history in the future. Thus, the facts of history will change with time. This makes the study of history, historiography, to be much more interesting than books, papers, and relics, and simply saying the past is the past. In recent years, states across the American South are reevaluating what history is appropriate to teach and how to frame controversial topics like slavery and civil rights. Many are surprised to learn that this is not the first time that school textbooks have been politicized in the United States. In the 1950s, Virginia sought to rewrite history in order to change uncomfortable facts to conform with their own personal and ideological beliefs. More recently, heightened racial tensions across the nation have compelled new discussions on race relations. In light of this, many school districts responded with moving towards more acknowledgement of racial and social injustices. Taking these into consideration, educators and policymakers are faced with a difficult question, which leads to the topic at hand. What political climate allows for the biased revision of history textbooks in public schools in the American South, both in the mid-century and in the present? In order to fully explore this question, we must first answer three questions. What parallels can be seen between the post-Brown period and the current crisis considering critical race theory? What materials have been created to establish and perpetuate this bias? And is education becoming the new civil rights movement? I took a qualitative approach to my research question by using official and personal accounts, as well as various primary sources such as textbooks and legislation. I was able to analyze the research question through the lens of politics and the history of civil rights, especially as it pertains to education. As soon as the gavel fell on the case of Brown versus Board of Education, Southerners and conservatives in general were put into a state of crisis. Their schools and soon their public spaces would be required to integrate African Americans into their privileged spaces. Within 2 years, a joint resolution was entered into the congressional record. Now known as the Southern Manifesto, 19 senators and 82 representatives declared that the Supreme Court overstepped its bounds and would employ, quote, all lawful means to bring about a reversal of this decision. One of the signatories, Virginia Senator Harry F. Byrd, stated that, quote, if we can organize the southern states for massive resistance to this order, I think that in time the rest of the country will realize that racial integration is not going to be accepted in the South. By resisting the court's mandate, they believed that the states could interpose their own sovereignty against that of the federal government. Similarly, in the 2020s, Virginians were also in the crux of another identity crisis. The Commonwealth has been slowly turning blue since 2006. Some scholars cite the election of Democratic Governor Douglas Wilder in 1990 as a sign of change, others a marked demographic shift during the millennium. Whichever the case may be, Virginia's voting record has become more blue than expected. The recent census shows that Virginia's growing population has also become decreasingly Caucasian. Projections show that by 2040, less than half of Virginia will identify as white. These demographic shifts have coincided with the untimely deaths of dozens of African Americans at the hands of law enforcement, sparking the Black Lives Matter protests and subsequent riots, counterposed with the rise of right-wing hate groups such as Identity Europa and the Proud Boys. In the struggle to recenter the white majority, conservative media has promoted to the idea that critical race theory, a postgraduate course on systemic inequalities, is being indoctrinated into kids in public schools. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, parents became more concerned over certain lessons being taught, and reports that lessons on oppressors versus oppressed were making certain students uncomfortable. In the wake of all of this, a new conservative voice arose in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, a Trump-endorsed private equity firm CEO. His commitment to culture war issues pertaining to race and LGBTQ matters resonated with Trumpists in Virginia, angry with Ralph Northam's more liberal stances and the so-called stolen election of 2020. This coincided with new controversy over the revision of history curricula nationwide, prompting many states to enact laws prohibiting the teaching of critical race theory or the spread of diversity, equity, and inclusion in their schools. Within hours of his inauguration, now Governor Youngkin signed his first executive order, banning the teaching of so-called divisive topics. With this order, he claims to have been attempting to recover Virginia's educational standards from a state of political indoctrination into, quote, teaching our children the value of freedom of thought and diversity of ideas. In both cases, Virginia conservatives expressed their concerns over a shifting demographic scene in an attempt to maintain a white Eurocentric focus on Virginia's education. These led to the decision to revise what Virginia considered proper history to teach. By 1957, the Commonwealth had produced 3 new texts: Virginia History, Government and Geography, and Cavalier Commonwealth. According to one of the authors, their goal was to instill Virginia ideals into the curriculum, all while admitting that the realistic version of history would, quote, put our ancestors into severe light. Virginia History, Government, and Geography, the 7th grade book, promoted many contemporary racial stereotypes of the time, of the happy slaves that were tamed by their savage nature. It also covered Virginia's native population as a monolithic, proud, but backward culture, prone to violence as a mean to settle differences. In both cases, white Europeans were seen as their saviors. Cavalier Commonwealth, the high school text, delved into more detail. It purported that slavery in civilization was better than, quote, barbarities they might have suffered in Africa. Again, the white savior complex. And in its most notorious line, it stated that the slave, quote, did not have to work as hard as the average free laborer, since he did not have to worry about losing his job. In fact, the slave enjoyed what we might call comprehensive Social Security. The drafted 2023 standard had similarly biased deletions and additions. Indigenous populations were referred to as America's first immigrants, playing off of present-day concerns over immigration and minimizing their impact on U.S. history. Many non-Western cultures were removed from world history standards, with expanded lessons on ancient Greece and Rome. Also noted by many groups was the deletion of Martin Luther King Jr. and Juneteenth from early elementary lessons, replacing them with lessons in basic philosophy and law, such as the Code of Hammurabi. Fortunately, in the months after their proposal, the standards underwent 3 major revisions, and on March 1st, a less contentious set of standards was approved. To compound matters, in recent years, more discussion has been committed to discussing school choice as a cure for public schools. By allowing public money to follow the student to whatever educational experience they explored, the competition would force public schools to become better. However, this has never been shown to be the case. According to a Harvard study, in states that offered school vouchers, no significant gains were shown by the students who took the money. However, significant negative effects were felt in the local public schools. School choice only widened educational inequality. Tuition was another driver of this inequality. Most schools tack on additional costs and hidden fees, such as activity fees, uniforms, and so forth. Also remember that most private schools do not offer transportation, thus parents need to be available for pickups and drop-offs daily, which could cut into work availability. Similar to homeschooling, this is a privilege of wealth. In addition to this, another more covert type of educational discrimination may develop from school choice. As these schools are private entities, they are not beholden to federal education laws, like the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which guarantees a free and appropriate education to all students. Thus, students with special needs can be denied access or charged extra to attend. Thus, we can see that education, while established as a public good, could yet again be the next battleground of civil rights. Politics will always reflect and be a reflection of the public sentiment at the time. For the first time in decades, public education has been returned to the forefront of Virginia politics. As such, these issues have come to haunt the Commonwealth of Virginia, as ghosts of times long past would soon rise again. In both eras, we can see that times of massive social and economic changes caused anxiety amongst the majority of Southerners. In the post-war period, the South saw the Black population becoming more upwardly mobile, demanding equal treatment denied them under Jim Crow laws. Today, the post-pandemic period has seen fears of indoctrination, as other marginalized groups are also demanding recognition and equal treatment. In both periods, conservatives sought to reintroduce a more back-to-basics, traditional education, reinforcing more Eurocentric views. They've also looked to school choice as a way to shield their children from those changes in society. Public education is a universal good. In restricting access to a fair and equitable education, policymakers risk endangering future generations into another stratified system of access and denial. It will be up to us to advocate for public education and provide for its future so that we won't become history as well. Very quickly, I'd like to take a moment to thank my mentor, Professor Gutman, for his constant support over the semesters, my advisor, Anne Marie Plunkett, for your patience, and Dr. Seth Horton for being there right at the beginning of this. I'd also like to extend a hearty thanks to all my professors, classmates, and friends for their unending support. Thank you very, very much.